Sure. Thank you. Welcome to this wonderful event. Good morning, good evening, fellow Toastmasters. I am so happy to see Toastmasters join from all around the world. We have people from Malaysia, Australia, and Pennsylvania, and many more. Let me go ahead and introduce Justin. Justin Strong is presentation skills class instructor and product manager at Western Digital. He has over 30 years of customer experience in the technology industry. He is a Toastmaster and is currently the club president of Vanguard. Justin's passion is in helping people give their best when it comes to presentation delivery. Now with that, let me hand it over to Justin Strong for the title of his speech, Storytelling with Data. Take it away, Justin.
Jamal, thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you everybody for allowing me to be here to share some of the principles and tips and tricks and information that I've learned over the years. I'm going to start sharing. Jamal, just let me know when you can see my screen, my share. And
yes, I can see.
All right, perfect. I'm really excited about this topic, and I'm passionate about this topic because I believe it will help you in your careers, in your business, and even in your everyday life. The story in your data. I'm sure all of you have, or at least many of you have heard of the name Warren Buffett. Now, Mr. Buffett is one of the wealthiest people in the world and considered one of the most savvy investors ever. And Warren had said that you can improve your value by up to 50% by learning communication skills or public speaking. Now, Warren Buffett has a single certificate on his office wall. And I'll give you a hint what it is. It's not his business degree. Warren Buffett has a certificate of a class that he took at the beginning of his career on public speaking skills, a Dale Carnegie course. And while I couldn't get Mr. Buffett to personally endorse this particular presentation, I'm sure that he would be excited and thrilled that you're increasing your skills in presentations. It's been estimated that 30 million presentations are given every single day. That's 20,000 presentations per minute. Unfortunately, all that a lot of those presentations do is persuade the audience that they wish that they had never attended the presentation in the first place. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to help you to avoid being one of those people that puts your audience to sleep with data. Now, one other important point to keep in mind also is that you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you cannot convince enough other people, it doesn't matter. Now, our industry is swimming in data. And if you're in anywhere near the tech industry or really any other industry, you will encounter data that you need to present to your audience in a way that's going to make sense to them and ultimately persuade them to take some type of action. So you have data, but so what? The cat here doesn't care, and your audience maybe doesn't care either, and it's your responsibility as a presenter to help your audience to care about the data that you present, and again, take some action. So I'm going to talk about 3 different ways that you can make your data come alive to your audience and make it meaningful, memorable, and persuasive. So let's go talk about that. So there's 3 steps, as I mentioned, to data story bliss. That's putting a story to your data. Number 1, choose your data, choose your story. So you have to determine what your story is, and we'll go through that. Number 2, choose your visualization. How do you want to visualize, whether it's a graph or a chart or whatever it is for your audience? And number 3, choose your highlight. How do you highlight the data that you really want your audience to be interested in? So number 1, choose your story. Think about what story does your data tell? And it sometimes helps to say, if your data were a newspaper article, what would your headline be? So I'm going to go through an exercise. Imagine you are a reporter for a school newspaper, and you're assigned to write a story, and here's the facts. The principal announced today that the entire school faculty will travel to Sacramento next Thursday for a colloquium in new teaching methods. Among the speakers will be anthropologist Margaret Mead, college president Dr. Maynard Hutchins, and California Governor Gavin Newsom. You are a reporter for the school newspaper. You have to write this article. What is your headline? So please enter it into the chat or just shout it out. What would the headline be for this particular article, given the facts that are listed here? So enter it into the chat if you got an idea of what the headline should be for this particular article.
The main headline should be concentrating on the colloquium, and secondly, the celebrities involved: Margaret Mead, Maynard Hutchins, and Governor Newsom, in that order. First the colloquium, and then the personalities involved.
Okay, all right, that's a great headline. I've got one in the chat that says travel to Sacramento next Thursday. Okay, any other takers on what would be a good headline for this particular article? Let me give you a hint. Consider who your audience is. Consider who your audience is. Famous speakers lead teacher colloquium in Sacramento. Okay. Anything else? Well, here's the suggestion.
Speakers from the interesting people.
Okay, faculty going to school. Well, here's the suggestion, considering your audience. Okay, another one. Our teachers will learn from leaders in Sacramento. Exciting colloquium on new teaching methods. Let's travel to Sacramento, folks. How about this one? Your audience are the students in the school. So what about this headline? No school next Thursday.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So when you think about who your audience is, they couldn't care less what the teachers are doing, whether they're going to Sacramento, whatever. All they care about is that they don't have to go to school next Thursday. So a lot of times we have a lot of data, and we need to understand what our audience cares about and then what the data means to our audience. The same data can have multiple stories, can tell multiple stories. We need to select the story that's going to be meaningful to our audience. Let's go through another example here. So this is an example of forecasted unemployment rates. Remember, our task we're focusing on right now is choosing our story. Take into account what your audience cares about. And as I mentioned, the same data can tell multiple stories. So this is the forecasted unemployment rates. We see it for about 8 different countries here. And this data could tell different stories. So one story might be Greece's unemployment rate is improving. So notice what I did here in the graph is that Greece is orange, everybody else is white, because that's what I want to highlight. More on this later on. Or the story might be unemployment rates are at an all-time low. And in here, I've actually removed Greece from here because that's not the story that I want to focus on, or it doesn't help to tell my story.
Netherlands.
Or it may be that there is a different story for each country. And I want to tell the story for each country. So it's your responsibility as a presenter to choose the story that you want your data to tell. A lot of times what we'll do, and I see this especially with engineering folks. I come from an engineering background. I have a degree in computing science. I was a software engineer for several years. And so I can say this, a lot of times we show up and throw up our data. We just show up, we've got data, and we just throw everything on there, and we expect our audience to be able to interpret it. Or we just interpret everything. We just tell them about everything. You as I mentioned, you as a presenter have a responsibility to determine what the story is that you're going to tell that's going to be meaningful to your audience. So number one, choose your story. The next one that we want to do is choose our visualization. So we have the story that we want to tell. Now we want to choose a visualization that helps to tell that story, hopefully in a graphical way. So a few things that we can do. One, does the visualization tell your story? So when you choose a visualization, whether it's a bar chart or a line chart, or maybe a scatter plot or a bubble graph, whatever it is, does it tell the story that you want to tell? First of all, we have to choose our story. If you haven't chosen our story, then the visualization probably doesn't matter as much. But you need to first choose the story that you want to tell, and that will make it easier to choose the visualization. Does it pass the billboard test? And is it easy for your audience to understand? And so we'll talk about these individually. We are visual animals. So if we look at this particular graphic here, you probably almost immediately were able to pick out the tiger in this particular graph, or in this particular photo. Computers are great at analyzing lots and lots of data, not as good at visualizing it, or visualizing pictures like this and being able to take a tiger out of a picture like that. But humans were really good at that. And so we need to ensure that our data is presented in a visual way, because it makes it, one, easier for your audience to process, and it makes it easier and a lot faster for your audience to process. Studies have shown that we process visual data about 100 times faster than tabular data. Let's go through an example. So we might look at this data, and if we look at the sum and average and standard deviation of number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let me get my laser pointer here. This is data set 1, 2, 3, and 4. If we look at the sum, standard deviation, and average, they're about the same for each data set. So in looking at that, we may be tempted to think, well, you know, they're probably very similar data. But then when we visualize it, it is a different story. Data set 1, data set 2, data set 3, and data set 4. Now that we visualized it, immediately you can see that there's significant differences in each one of these data sets. Whereas if you were just to look at it in a tabular format, those differences wouldn't jump out at all. So if you can, and I would say almost always, visualize your data. Now, choosing a visualization that tells your story. There are lots of options that we have, but really most of the time it breaks down to a few of the old standards. A line graph to show data over time, a bar graph to look at amounts over time or just comparison, a pie chart when we want to show parts of a whole, a stacked bar chart also can show parts of a whole over time. There's a graphic called a slope graph, where we want to show the data at the beginning and at the end of some type of an interval. A histogram, density plot, and scatter plot. There are other visualizations also, and I could probably spend a whole day just doing data visualization. That's one of my passions. But choose a visualization that is going to tell your story. And we're going to go through a couple of examples in a lot of detail. But here's some examples of really bad visualizations. So I think this, I don't know how hard somebody tried. I almost have the idea that somebody tried really hard to do a really bad visualization. This is the exported number of tons of bananas in 1994 through 2005. And there's so many things wrong with this particular chart. Well, here's another example. This is the 100 most active tweeters. And I suppose if your goal was to just show the dispersion or the distribution, this kind of showed it, but I would challenge you to be able to take any one of the users which are on the right-hand side of this graph and align it to one of the pie slices in the pie chart, because they're repeated probably, each color is probably repeated like 5 or 10 times. Well, just when you thought it couldn't get worse, somebody did it in 3D. So here's a 3D pie chart, and super difficult to understand and see and visualize what the individual slices of the pie chart are. At least they had leaders to be able to align each individual slice with its description. But again, really bad. So choose your visualization that will support the story that you want to tell. The next one is, does it pass the billboard test? So what does this billboard mean? Just shout it out. Anybody?
McDonald's on the left.
McDonald's on the left. McDonald's didn't even have to put their whole logo on. It's so well known. It's so iconic. McDonald's takes advantage of everybody knows McDonald's. And all they needed to say was, if you want to go to McDonald's, on your left. Now, when we do a graph, I always ask myself, does it pass the billboard test? Can somebody understand the graph in like 5 seconds? Because that's all somebody has, 5 seconds or less, maybe sometimes even 2, depending on how fast they're going. That's all the time somebody has to understand and read what's on a billboard. Sometimes I see what's on a billboard and there's this like 8-9 digit phone number. I'm like, who's going to be right? I guess unless you have a passenger, but who's going to be writing that down? So when you have a graphic or visualization, ask yourself, does it pass the billboard test? If I put this on a billboard, is there enough time for somebody to understand it? Well, here's the visualization that doesn't really do that. There's so many things to fix in here. What they're trying to describe here is Connecticut has an aging population. Now, it's very difficult from this graph. Actually, there's a lot of things wrong with it, but it's really difficult in this graph to see what the author is trying to communicate. They're trying to communicate that Connecticut's population is continuing to age, but it's difficult to see the story. Well, here's the change that they suggested. The story is better. They say over 65s will rise to 16% of the state's population by 2020, but it's still really difficult to see what the story is from the graphs here. Well, what about this one? So first of all, the headline. A lot of times people will waste some of the most important real estate on a slide by just saying something like a generic title like Connecticut's population or Connecticut's population by age group. Instead, use the really important real estate that you have at the top of the slide, because that's where people's eyes go first, is the top, unless you have something really bright and big in the middle for your headline. And the headline is, over 65s will rise to 16% of the state's population by 2020. And the impact is this will cause issue for state funding. And here's the graph. Pretty significant difference, but you can immediately see if you look at the 65 and plus, that it's set to overtake the age group of 0 to 19, probably somewhere in like the 2022 timeframe. And this graph, this visualization, supports the story that you want to tell. That over 65s are going to be rising to 16% of the state's population immediately. It passes the billboard test and it supports the story that you want to tell. So very clearly, select the graph or the visualization that's going to support your story and make sure it passes the billboard test. Choosing your visualization, let's go through an example, more detail. Let's say that you are a product manager working for Saucy Sauces. This is a company that makes sauces, and you're looking for your next big product. And you want to know which market segment is growing the fastest. And you believe that that segment has the most opportunity for a new product. So the fastest growing segment should be the one that has the most opportunity. So you're given this data. And along the left, you notice that we've got red pasta, white pasta, green, vegetable, Mexican, red and green, yellow curry, green curry, Masaman, Penang, and other. And then you've got each one of those for each year. And so this is the market size for each one of these different types of sauces. Well, kind of difficult to see any trends here and any information. But you as a product manager, you analyze the data, and the first thing you do is say, okay, I'm going to break it down by category. I've got pasta sauce, Mexican sauce, curry sauce, and other. So we still need to choose our story. So we're working on that. Well, what you see in the data is that the curry is the only segment growing in market share, the curry segment. And curry has gone from 2% share in 2010 up to 7.4% share in 2022. And so you decide as the product manager, this is the segment that you want to go after. So now you've chosen your story. That is, curry is the fastest growing segment, and this is the segment that we want to go after. Now you want to choose your visualization to support your story. Well, here's one. Your headline, curry is the only segment growing in market share. That's a reasonable headline. And curry has gone from 2% in 2010 to 7.4% in 2022. And you've got a visualization that shows this yellow part of the graph that curry is increasing in share. So not bad. You've chosen your story. This graph supports your story. Well, there's a different way that we could visualize it also. Here's another way where we do a line chart and we show pasta, and you can see pasta is going down in market share, Mexican, and the curry market share is the only one that's going up. So this is another way of representing it, and possibly maybe a little bit better. Something that may be a little bit better still would be this one, and this is what's called a slope graph. So instead of showing all of the data in between the 2010 and 2022, because that's probably not that relevant, there's not much action happening in between. What you really want to emphasize is the difference in between 2010 and 2022. And here you can clearly see that pasta's gone down. Mexican has gone down a little bit. Other has gone down, maybe remained flat, but curry is the one that's gone up. So this would probably be a really good way to visualize your data, support your story, and it passes the billboard test. Somebody looks at this immediately and they see that the curry is the only one that's going up. And because we've got rid of the years in between, we haven't emphasized those, all of the irrelevant data is not on the graph, and only the relevant data is there to help your audience understand your story. All right, let's go to the third aspect of this, and that is choosing your highlight. So you've chosen your story and your visualization. You know the story that you want to tell your audience. You've got a visualization that really supports it. Now, a third aspect of this is how you highlight your story to your customer or to your audience based on the visualization that you choose. So let's go into that. So here, let's go back to our curry example, our sauce example. This certainly shows that curry is the only one, but how do we even make that more obvious to our audience? Well, one way of doing that would be to put all of the other categories that are less important in gray, and the one that we want to highlight in orange or some other color, maybe red. Now we have to be careful when we use red, because red usually has some type of a meaning, and usually it's negative. So orange might be a good one to highlight, or maybe even green, because that might be the one that represents, hey, this one's going up. But when we take our good visualization and make it even better by highlighting whatever it is that we want to. Let's take another example. So this is a graph of infant mortality rates in industrialized countries. Now, this is a little bit of a spaghetti graph, and it makes it a little bit difficult to see. We can kind of see what's happening as a group, but to see individual countries is really, really challenging. And we want to determine what our story is that we want to tell our audience. So in this particular story, we want to talk about US and South Korea healthcare, and we want to compare them. Now, US and the US infant mortality rates, we've put the US we put in red. And you can see that over time, from 1990 through 2016, the US infant mortality rate has gone down, but not really as much as all the other countries. And all the other countries, and then the South Korea has started significantly higher than the US, but then has gone down significantly. So the story that we want to tell is a story of two healthcare systems, South Korea and US. And we want to compare them. And one of the things we're looking at is infant mortality rates, and talk about why is that the case. And you can see all the other countries here are in gray. They're interesting, but only as a group for comparison purposes. And so to tell our story, one of the things that we can do is, and this is available in PowerPoint, is we may want to talk about and animate in our data. So when we first start, we say in 1990, the South Korea healthcare system wasn't really very well developed. And so the infant mortality rate was significantly higher than the US infant mortality rate. But over time, as the country developed, the healthcare system got better, and the country put more and more money into the healthcare system. And finally, around 1998, the South Korean infant mortality rate was about the same as the US. But that's not the end of the story. Because South Korea continued to invest in their healthcare system and made their healthcare socialized in that everybody had access to the same healthcare, their infant mortality rate continued to decline. And you can see that the United States infant mortality rate pretty much leveled off, maybe went down a little bit, but not much. Until finally in 2016, you can see that there's a significant difference in infant mortality rates between South Korea and the US and the other developed countries in the world. Now you've told your story. Now you may want to go into, well, why? Why so much difference between those countries, between the US and South Korea? And now you can talk to your audience about the story behind that. And maybe you've got more charts and graphs. But you determined what your story is, and there could have been lots of stories. You've used your visualization to support your story, and then you've highlighted your story in that all of the other countries other than South Korea and the United States, they're in gray, and then red and blue represent the two countries that you really want to emphasize. Now, let's go back to our pasta exercise that we looked at. So in this pasta, we've got each product is a different color. Well, this makes it a little bit more difficult. This makes it a little bit difficult to see. So when we highlight, what we can do is that we can say, well, maybe each category is a different color. And that makes it a lot easier to see because we really want to focus on categories rather than individual products, because individual products just has too much information. And so one other thing that I've done here also is that I've done something called direct labeling. And so on the right-hand side, instead of putting my labels down here, which is the default that Excel will do or PowerPoint will do in most graphing programs, what I've done is that I've done direct labeling. And so you've got other, curry, Mexican, and pasta. This does two things. The first one is somebody doesn't have to keep on going and looking at the bottom and then looking at the top and at the bottom and the top to match up the colors with the categories. And then two, it gets rid of all the problems that you have with people trying to determine, is that a light blue or a dark blue? Which color corresponds to the legend and which doesn't? So I highly recommend that you use direct labeling on almost all the graphs that you do, if at all possible, because direct labeling makes it so much easier for your audience to see what you're doing. And it makes them have to work a little less harder to understand your graph. And that will make it pass the billboard test a lot more easier. Okay, can we do it maybe even a little bit better here on highlighting? Well, what if we said we want to really highlight the curry category and everything else we put in white and the curry category we put in orange? Now, if you want to compare against different categories, maybe you want to highlight, but then if you really want to just focus on the curry, and then maybe put everything else in white or gray and the curry in whatever color you want to use to highlight that. So that's another example of choosing your highlight to support and tell your story. So 3 steps to data story bliss. Number 1, choose your story. Number 2, choose your visualization. And number 3, choose your highlight. So let's go through one more, a little longer example to show this in action. Okay, you've been hired as a consultant now for Light 'em Up Fireworks Company. And the company's revenue and profits have been declining over the past 10 years. And you've been tasked for recommending ways that they can increase their revenue and profitability. Well, you recently attended a class in storytelling with data, and you want to put your skills to work. So here is the data that you were provided. So Light 'em Up has 14 different products, and here are the product revenues since 2012. And I'm not expecting you to go through this data, but this is the data that you were provided as a consultant. So let's take a look and see what the consultant did with this. So number 1, the revenue picture does not look good. The revenue has decreased from about 1 million in 2012 to about 866,000 in 2022. So significant revenue decrease. So you've looked at it, but there's some good news in all that data. 3 products have actually increased in revenue over the past 10 years. And you notice that those products that have actually increased in revenue have the highest prices. So from this, you believe that customers prefer the higher priced products. And presumably those products are the ones that produce, the biggest fireworks, the biggest lights, and are the most exciting fireworks. And so you determine that those are the fireworks that customers prefer. So that's good news for the company in that they're your highest priced products. Bad news, well, maybe not bad news, but not so good news might have been that customers only prefer the really lowest priced products, but customers prefer the higher priced products. So your recommendation is for Light 'em Up to develop more higher priced products, and this will increase their revenue. So how do we tell the story? Well, one, we choose our story, our visualization, and our highlight. So let's look at that. So our story is Light 'em Up annual revenue has decreased 16% from 2012 to 2022. 3 of the 14 products have increased in revenue. The Husker Do's, the Dipsy Daisies, and Whisker Biscuits. Those are the products that have actually increased in revenue. These are Light 'em Up's highest priced products. So to increase revenue, Light 'em Up should develop more higher priced products. Now notice this story is a little bit more developed, but I've determined my story before I did any graphs at all, and the complete story. Now I can go in and then start choosing my visualizations to support my story. So number one, Light 'em Up revenue has decreased 16% from 2012 to 2022. So here's a visualization that would represent that. I've got a starting revenue, and then it kind of goes up and down, and then an ending revenue. 1 million down to 866,000. Now, out of those, now the second one is we want to talk about out of those 14 products that we have, 3 have decreased in revenue over that time. Well, here was our first graph that we put in place, and this is a bit of a spaghetti graph and really doesn't tell our story at all. Very difficult. So let's see what we can do to help visualize that particular information. So this isn't what we want to do. So one of the things that we can do is use that slope graph that I was talking about, put all of the products on the slope graph and show their revenue in 2012 and then also in 2022. A lot better, but we can do something a little bit better than that. And we'll show you when we choose our, when we choose our highlighting. So this will show us, and you can see, if you look closely, which ones have increased or decreased over time, but we're going to do that a little bit better by highlighting. So we'll get to that in just a minute. That's our third step. So choosing our visualization. Now, the next one that we want to talk about are the Light 'em Up's highest products. How do we visualize that these products are our highest priced products? So one way of doing it would be through a chart here. Now, as I mentioned, a lot of times you'll want to use, and the majority of time you'll want to use some type of a graph, but sometimes a chart is the best way to visualize or the best way to show data. So here we've highlighted the 3 highest revenue products. We've got the 2012 revenue, the 2022 revenue, the percent change, and the 2022 price. So that's option 1. Now, here's another option. And this is looking at the change in the price versus percent change in revenue. So the blue is showing the percent change in revenue. So the ones on the left are the ones that have increased in revenue. And then the ones towards the right are the ones that have actually decreased in revenue. And then the orange shows the ASP. And so you can see here that the ones that have increased in revenue actually have the highest ASPs. So these are the ASPs. And there's one outlier here. You're always going to have those. You may want to explain why there's an outlier. Maybe it's just like an old favorite that people had or what have you. But on this graph, you have shown, this is another way of visualizing the percent change in revenue. And then on the same graph, the ASPs. And so that you can see that those ASPs are with the ones that have increased in revenue are the ones that with the highest ASPs. So that's the second option. Both of these are actually not too bad, right? Some people think that actually would argue that maybe this is a little bit easier to see. Sometimes it also depends on the executives or the people that you're presenting to. So you have to take your audience into account also. So I think both of these are good options. Okay, number 3, your highlight. Choose your highlight. So remember that slope graph that we had at the beginning. Well, here it's a little bit difficult to see which ones have actually increased and which ones haven't. So again, if we put the ones that have increased in orange and everybody else in gray, now they jump out. And so they're a lot easier to see which ones actually have increased in revenue versus the rest who have decreased in revenue over the time period that we're looking at. Now, here's the graph that we had before also, and this is another way of highlighting. So you can see here what we've done to highlight. We've put a box around the ones that are of interest, right? That we really want the audience to focus on. Those are the 3 with the highest ASP and the 3 with the increase in revenue over time. So we can use just a very simple box to highlight, and we may want to put some type of text description in there saying, hey, here's the ones that are that have actually increased in ASP over time and increased in revenue, or have the highest ASP and increased in revenue. So here's our final presentation. Light 'em Up revenue has decreased 16% from 2012 to 2022. And 3 of our 14 products, though, have increased in revenue over that time. The Whisker Biscuits, the Nipsey Daisies, and Husker Dus. Those 3 products have actually increased in revenue. And those 3 products are our highest priced products that we have. They have the highest price out of all the products that we have. Now, my recommendation is that to increase revenue, Light 'em Up should develop more higher end products. Very simple story. So there is a more extended example where we've gone from data to a story that we tell with data to support a particular recommendation. And the process that we went through is we chose our story, we chose our visualization, and then chose the highlight to highlight the story that we want to tell with the visualization. And if you follow this process, your presentations will be more meaningful, more memorable, and persuasive to your audience. One more thing, don't forget to include a call to action at the end of your presentation. You've got this great data story, you've got a great visualization, you've highlighted it. Don't forget to include a call to action. What is it that you want your audience to do with the information that you provided? So here's your challenge. Apply one of the techniques that you've learned in this presentation in your next data-based presentation. Identify the story in your data, make it easy for the audience to see the story with your visualization, and maximize your signal to noise ratio in your visualization. Signal to noise ratio mean that the story should be, and your data should be the highlight. The noise is everything else that doesn't contribute to that. And one final thing, an offer from me. Help with your next presentation. If you have a data-based presentation coming up, one of my passions and one of the things that drives me and that I get great satisfaction out of is helping people with their presentations. Send me an email at justin@strong-communications.com, and I will spend some time with you to work on your next presentation. This is something that I really like. I don't ask for anything of it. No, I'm not going to ask you to, to buy anything or anything like that. I just really like helping people with their presentations, and I do this on a very regular basis within my company and outside my company and in Toastmasters. So if you have a presentation coming up and you want some help, it doesn't even have to be really data-based. I'll be more than happy to help you out. Finally, question and answer Q&A. So does anybody have any questions?
looks like Arnie has a question. We're going to limit one question per audience because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people who have questions. Arnie, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. George. I have only one question, but it has a little three parts there. Mr. Stroll, how do you choose the story from the data, or the data would choose the story? And is it possible that there are more than one story from the data? Point number one. Point number two, how do you choose the anchor and the anchoring visualization and highlights of your story? Thank you.
Okay, so I think there were three questions. Is that correct?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, yes. So the first one is, I think if I remember correctly, does your data determine or choose your story, or the other way around? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, yes. Sir.
Okay, yeah. Well, so there's a couple of different things that you have to take into account. First of all, you have to understand who your audience is and what do they care about. Because something that you may care about, your audience doesn't care about. And so if you understand your audience and what they care about, that will help you to choose the story from your data. So the data, of course, will dictate or influence, of course, what your story is. Because if you're trying to tell a story, and let's say you're a consultant, right? And you think that the problem that your customer has is X, and then you get your data and you find out, oh, my data doesn't support my original premise, then yes, your data is going to influence your story. So two things, right? One, your data, of course, is going to influence your story, but leading into your second question, your data can tell many stories. And it's up to you as a presenter to choose what story or stories that you want to highlight from your data. And that doesn't mean that you're trying to mislead your audience. It means that you're trying to lead your audience. You're trying to tell your audience, look, this is what we found in the data. And ideally, knowing what your audience cares about, because there could be 3 or 4 different stories that your data could tell, but you want to tell the story that you think is going to be most beneficial to your audience. And it also may be one that you've got a premise that you're trying to prove, and you've found data that supports that. And so you may want to use that data to help support the story. Now, you had a third item. I can't recall what it was.
How do you anchor your visualization element and highlights elements in your story?
So sorry, how do you
Anchor? How do you project it?
Oh, how do you project? You mean through a visualization tool, or
well,
what?
just like in your example, there are 3 items that increase in price and they increased in revenue. Why don't you use that? Can you use that as an anchor?
Oh, as the anchor. Oh, in your story. Yes. So you may have a single item that you're trying to promote in your story, and that's going to be your main theme. And you certainly can use that as the anchor. In fact, you might, a lot of times I've seen a lot of good presentations where they start off with the conclusion and they say, so if we look at this particular example here, we may say, instead of recommendation, and a lot of times this is done with executives. Executives are a different animal than a lot of people. A lot of times they have very little time, and sometimes your presentation will be cut short. And so a lot of times what I'll do when I'm presenting to executives, I'll give them the high-level summary and then go into detail. And sometimes the executives don't care about the details. Just give me the bottom line. Oh, you're saying that to increase revenue, we should develop more higher end products? You know what? I agree with that. I was just looking at go ahead. Yep. Now, and then the executive might leave, and then, the other people, the people under them might be left to implement it. So yes, you can use your story and your recommendation as an anchor and repeat that throughout the presentation. and then use your data and your visualizations to support what your conclusion is.
Thank you, Mr. Strong. Thank you, Ms. George. Thank you so much. I love
Sure.
it.
Thank you so much. There was another question in the chat about your slides. Your slides are really awesome. Will you be sharing those slides?
Absolutely, yes. I'll be sharing a PDF version of the slides. Jamal, would I send that to you, or Abhijit? We'll figure it out. We'll get it out to everybody. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Jerry has a question. Jerry.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mhm.
Thank you, Justin. It's a very fantastic speech, and learn a lot about the how to tease out the data. But my perspective, I think it's the data is only part of the whole presentation. It's more, I think it's also a comprehensive thought process, not only the link to the data. It's about the similar communication skills, like concise, clarity. It's very important also for the data. So connecting your presentation, I just think about when we use presentation, we use PPT, yeah, PowerPoint. So when you have the thought process, you know how to present yourself, but you don't understand the PowerPoint skills. You don't know how to figure out to visualization. So do you have any recommendation how to balance the skills and your thought process? Thank you.
Jerry, yeah. Very good points, Jerry. Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. This presentation is one of like 5 or 6 that I give. I also have I teach a two-day class in presentation skills. And one of the presentations that I have, and maybe we can do this at a future, is on content development. I also have a presentation on persuasive presentations. How do you use different techniques to persuade your audience? Again, I've got another presentation on developing your content in a way that, how do you organize it? How do you give it structure? And how do you use logic and stories and also credibility to persuade your audience to take action? So it's a big topic, Jerry. And I don't think I have really time to really address it really well here, but there's a couple of things I will say. Number one is content is king. Your content is the most important part of your presentation. If you have great content, but you have really not so great presentation skills, your audience can still be mesmerized by what you say. But if you have very poor content, but great presentation skills, eventually you're going to lose your audience, because they'll see through it and they'll see that, gee, you're really not saying anything. You're saying a lot of words, but I don't see any meaning or anything useful for me. So make sure that you, first and foremost, that you put your content as your most important part of your preparation for your presentation. Yes, you do need good slides, right? And I also present on that. PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint, and how to avoid it. It's a horrible way to die. You do need good slides, and you do need good presentation skills. How do you, your body language and your posture and your tone and your vocal variety, but your content is king. And like I said, I wish I had a lot more time to talk about it, but that's a whole nother subject that I could spend a whole day on.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Rebecca.
Yes, I was traveling home and listening to you very intently, and you said something in the beginning that made me laugh. I mean, first of all, the statistic about the 20,000 presentations every minute, is that what you said?
Yes.
And how many of them are awful? And I agree with you. I'm sure that is true. But you said something, it was alliterative, and you used the words throw up. Can you say that again? Do you remember?
Sure. Sometimes, and I find this especially with technical presentations, and I attend a very technical presentation every week, where I where some of the technical people in our company, the engineers, present. And so oftentimes what we do as presenters is we show up and throw up.
Yes,
Meaning
that
we
was it.
show up to our presentation and we just throw up all the data that we have without any thought to what does our audience care about? Is all of this meaningful? Can I not present some of this data and still have the same impact on my audience?
Yes, that's brilliant. Very, very good. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Absolutely. Vivian,
Thank you for what you just shared. I love the question and I love the answer. Now, I have been to presentations where content is king. Check. Wonderful. Slides were wonderful. Slides were excellent, but it was delivered in a monotone manner for
Yeah,
35 minutes.
I totally agree that delivery matters, but I'm saying that content is more, if you had to choose one to be good at, I would choose content over delivery. Because I've had people, I've had seen, like, let's say on YouTube or even a presentation where I was intently interested in the topic. And I really wanted to get that information. Like, wow, I want to learn that. The presenter wasn't that great, but I endured a poor delivery because I really wanted that information. Now, if it were the opposite, where I really wanted the information and it was a great delivery, the person was funny, they had great vocal variety, they had great gestures, they had great virtual eye contact, but 10 minutes into the presentation, I still hadn't got a single actionable piece of advice, I would probably turn it off. I would probably, don't waste my time, right? You wasted my time, right? If I want to be entertained, I'll turn on Netflix, right? So I don't think it's a matter of either or, though. Yes, you can be a good presenter and you can be and have great content, but put your content first and make sure that you've got something that's going to be of value to your audience, and then make sure that you've got all the other parts of your presentation that you do well in.
Thank you, Justin. I loved your answer. Thank you.
thank you. I will take one last question before we end the call.
Okay, there's a question in the chat that I see. How do we have a call to action if the presentation is about presentation findings or presenting findings? Okay, so I assume that so what the question is about is, well, what if we just we did some research and these are the things that we found. We found A, B, and C. Well, again, as a presenter, your responsibility is to understand what your audience cares about. Why did you do the research in the first place and your findings? And then what relevance does it have to your audience? Now, your action, call to action, might be a lot of different things, right? It might be, hey, go visit my website. Or it might be that all you want to do is tell people, hey, for more information on this, go here. That could be the call to action. And sometimes you have a really, really small call to action. It might be for your audience, because a lot of times, if you're trying to get your audience to change, change is hard. And so a lot of times what you'll do is pick the smallest possible change that you think your audience can make and challenge them to do that. I don't know how many people have read the book Atomic Habits, but one of the tips that that is given in that book is, if you want to form a habit to begin with, let's say you want to go to the gym, don't worry about going to the gym every day. Just lace up your shoes. The first day, all you do is lace up your shoes. Then maybe the next day you lace up your shoes again, and maybe you get in the car. Maybe you don't even make it to the gym that day, but eventually you may form that habit of going to the gym every day. Now, with your audience, you might have a very small action that you want them to take. Again, maybe it's just visiting the website, or maybe it's just reading here for more information, or whatever it might be. But they're also, if you're not expecting your audience to make a change or a decision or do something as a result of the presentation, I kind of question whether the presentation was really needed in the first place. So really think about, if I don't have a call to action, then maybe I need to change my story or my data, or maybe sometimes the best thing is to not present at all and save everybody all that time in listening to you. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. Let's give Justin Strong a big round of applause. Justin,
Hey.
yes, Justin, you shared with us how not to show up and throw up, but make the presentation as meaningful, memorable, and persuasive as possible. And I like the call to action you have for us. Just make a small change. And with that, I adjourn this meeting, but please feel free to stay back and ask any questions you have for Justin.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jamal. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you for
Enjoy.
Justin. I have a question. Your content is really helpful. I just wonder if your presentations have recorded